Hey guys, this is JNandez 87 and I'm recording here a live video playing PLO 500 across two tables. On the left hand we get under the gun heel limped, unknown player, we flop top pair in a wrap, so pretty strong holding. I'm gonna start bet out, protect my hand against some overcards. At the same time we're building a pot in case we hit straight. And on the right table it's pretty much worthless in terms of what hand we have. There's a lot of unknown players at the tables at the moment, which is awesome. And on the left, I don't think we get a lot of better hands to fold. You could have a hand like two kings, which is a set now and would raise. You could have a hand like king jack, who could raise, or king x of diamonds. So I don't think he's folding the turn a lot of the time. And I also think I'm behind. So I'm just gonna check in order to keep the pot reasonable in terms of pot size and trying to make my hand. Now getting the straight here. While a flush is possible, I'm going to check my hand and actually fold if he bets. I don't think there are many hands that can bluff at this point or have the necessity to bluff, and that I'm beat by a flush quite often, too often in order to justify calling. On the right, I face a 3-bet, very standard call, and we flop middle pair flush draw and open-ended straight draw. So this is a very strong hand. Specifically, you always have to put your hand strength in relation to the pot size. Or more so stack to pot ratio, and you can see here there's 117 in there. We got 422, so under 4. In a situation where the SPR is under 4, this hand is tremendously strong and absolutely strong enough to get in all the money. And if we're talking about SPRs, you know, where there's like 10 or something, then we have to be more careful with what we're actually doing and how much money we are committing. On the left hand, I bet the flop small, 883 is the board, and the reason I did that is because I don't have anything, and if he also doesn't have anything, I'm probably going to just take it down. On the right, it looks like the money goes in, or at least from his end. So he most likely is going to have an overpair like aces, and the question is whether I want to just call and see what the river brings, or if I want to go all in case I think I have the best hand sometimes. I think I very, very often do not have the best hand here. Against ace, king, queen, jack, I probably would. Against ace queen, yeah, I think I don't have the best hand, so I'm gonna actually just call, have a look at what the river brings, which is a straight. But if the river is an ace, for example, I can definitely fold. If the river is a deuce or 3, I think it probably is a fold. Now it's easy jam, and we actually get paid off by aces, and we take down about 100 bigs. On the left table, this is a difficult scenario if it would be heads up, specifically because my hand tends to play very bad against holdings like ace XX. It's very hard to outflop ace XX if you have a pair yourself, but the way it is right now, there are more implat odds involved if I hit the queen when there's another player in there. We all have 100 bigs or more, so that's a pretty decent spot, and I end up calling. 456 rainbow is a board texture that nobody really hits very often here. The small blind player is supposed to have a lot of high cards or aces, and the cold caller is going to have a lot of very connected hands in the upper range, so king, queen, jack 10 and stuff like that. So I'm going to bet here, and if someone jams, I'm not happy about it, but I'm going to go ahead and stack off, and I'm going to bet on the bigger end, 127. I could bet 80, but I don't really want to induce something. If someone has like ace, ace, deuce, I don't try to get him to check jam. So I'm betting 127 in order to discourage him from doing such plays. This guy now calls, which is very weird because there are no real draws on the table that don't represent, you know, one pair at least on top of that. So I'm a little bit confused and worried that he might be slow playing. What could he have? King, king, 4, 3. I don't know. I'm kind of confused. I want to see the river. I'm pretty sure I'm behind at this point, and he might fold something better, like kings. But other than that, other than this specific holding, I don't see much in terms of what he could fold that is better than my hand. River's an ace, which doesn't help me, obviously. So I think I have the worst hand here. Although, if he checks one more time, can I be convinced that he has kings and trying to make him fold? Probably, most likely, the way I know myself, I would probably not go for it. And by that I mean I would probably not bluff. But he makes it easy on me and jams, and we have a very easy fold. So let's see if I can bring up a HUD here in a moment. I'm not going to use a very big HUD. And the reason is because I just don't know the HUD very well, the one that I'm just representing here. Although it looks sort of visual. I was also worried for a second that maybe it's just too overwhelming, but actually the way it looks at the moment, I think it's okay from a viewer experience. Let me know in the comment field here if you find that sort of very distracting. This guy seems to be very tight, VPIP 8 and raise 3 only, so I'm a little bit scared and we are deep stacked. So I'm going to just call an unknown player with such tight stats. I'm going to refer towards potentially a recreational player. And in a three-way situation, the thing is, in a three-way situation in PLO, a lot of the times what we're playing is actually a game that is called there's no real preflop aggressor. So you want to just lead out in case you have something worth protecting, and that's what I'm doing here on the flop. He decides to call, and the 7 is not a very good card because it could bring him straight. I don't think he has a straight very often. I don't have a single diamond in my hand, and he could easily have that. But also don't want to inflate the pot even further and just check. On the left, I bet the flop, lead out in order to gain value, but also in order to get a little bit of protection against random hands. You know, we're playing against 2-player on the flop here on the left, and that means 8 cards. And against 8 cards, we need a lot of protection. The turn is a similar story towards the right before, where I don't need a lot of protection, but at the same time, I need even less protection, but at the same time, I don't want to inflate the pot even further. On the right, I get squeezed, and a squeezing player here is usually going to have high cards, ace, x, x, aces, and my hand actually plays very poorly against that. So although I'm not a very big fan of folding against 3-bets, this is a spot where I think is worth doing so. And I label it as basically situations where the opposition range is very narrowed and I have an ace XXX hand or a pair in my hand that is not very well connected and double suited. Those situations are more often than not actually a fold. And on the left, we flop air basically one more time. I'm not quite sure if I like that because he has kings and queens and a 10x, and I don't think my fold equity is high enough to bet this here, but happened in the heat of the moment. On the right table, this guy limp calls and I fire flop. I'm also gonna fire this turn card for various reasons, and I'm gonna make a small bet on the left because I think there's a pretty good chance he has 10x or kings or queens, and all those hands are in pretty big trouble on this turn card, on the ace, the scare card, so to speak. And firing one more time doesn't have to work that often, 33% of the time with this sizing, and I think that's reasonably likely to happen 33% of the time that he folds. So I'm okay with double barreling there. On the left, I call the big blind because the price is nice, and then I'm gonna proceed most of the time in the situation pretty straightforward, going to the flop, turn river. Mainly, you know, some people get confused when they think about the mentality of defending many hands in the big blind, and because they feel this is an aggressive move somehow and they want to continue the aggression post flop. But in reality, the reason you're calling is because the price is really good and you're continuing straightforward post flop, and that's still going to be better than folding actually. You know, you always have to look at it in the light of opportunity cost, which means when you're folding your big blind, it's going to cost you one big blind, and that's very significant in the big scheme of your overall win rate. One big blind is 100 big blinds 100, and my win rate is like 8 to 9 big blinds overall. So losing 100 big blind in a certain scenario per 100 is a very significant thing. So even if it's only one big blind, like here, you should be focused on playing your best, even in small and medium pots. And that sometimes makes a difference between a decent player and a very good player. On the right, he checks to me, which is sort of weird, but I'm going to fire half pot again. It needs to work about 33% at the time. And even if he calls, I can improve to backdoor diamonds, a 9, a king, a 2 pair could be good. And a lot of the times, you know, if you have a little bit of something and you're in position, it's checked to you, it's probably a pretty decent decision to just fire. And I don't necessarily mean like fire multiple streets, but fire the flop, see what happens, try and take it down. The 9-9 deuce 5 is a difficult hand here because, again, like if you have a pair in your hand, it is difficult to play against 3-bets. And when I open the late position and we're all playing 100 bigs, it is quite feasible that I get 3-bet a reasonable frequency. That's a real danger. On a very dry board here, a pretty dry board, I'm going to bet the small sizing. And on the right, I have the nuts, got called on the turn, and the 5 actually makes another straight. So I don't think he's going to fold a straight. So I'm going to size up here. And when he has the spades, he's going to fold anyway. So he snap calls it away. And sometimes you really have to look at the second best hand and how much that hand is going to pay and then pick the right sizing. And a lot of the times it means sizing up, even though that could be exploitable. The player pool is big, even on PLO 500. And it's not so easy for people, even for good players, to note if you're sizing up slightly in some certain situations. You don't want to overdo it against very good players you're playing all the time if you're playing regularly in the pool. But as a general rule, it's probably a smart decision to do so. On the left, I turned 2 pair. I could fire out, but I think against 4 other players, even though the flop gets checked around, I'm going to check fold now my 5-3, because there is a slight chance I have the best hand at this moment, but my equity in the pot is going to be very, very low against 2 ranges, against 2 players. Another small stab on me on the right. Again, in position. Doesn't have to work very often. Advocate doing that. Quite often he goes for a small check raise, which is confusing. It looks like he's representing some hand like ace-x with a good heart. I'm going to just call. I don't have a very good feeling about the hand, but the price is really good, and I want to see a turn card for 30 bucks more. On the left, we are in 3-way situation, ace 10-7. The problem with bluffing here is when someone has the king of clubs, he's going to fight back in some way. And that's going to be pretty costly because I cannot really react to someone raising or floating even very well. So I'm going to just check fold. On the right, he makes it 90. And even though I improved my hand, I think it's pretty likely that I'm dominated here. And he didn't check raise, just a random hand. And a lot of the times when people are sizing down in this situation on draw heavy boards, they end up having a very good draw on top of a good mate hand. And my hand, the 9-high flush draw, and tends to go very bad against someone who has a better flush draw, obviously, without a pair. Open up blind on blind. This is a very good flop for my range. When he doesn't 3-bet, he's not going to have a lot of those high card combinations. He decides to call flop, and that could be easily ace-x, or it could also be clubs. I don't have clubs in my hand, and I'm going to fire here one more time for protection. And there is the possibility that he has a hand like ace-9 or ace-8 and it's going to call, and I'm still ahead in that spot. And obviously, like the main objective is to be protecting my hand. If you have any questions about the hand, let me know. About the hands, let me know in the chat. Happy to answer, and look out for more and more content to come out in the very near future. At the moment, we're building a lot of things in the background, as I mentioned, and 2016 is going to be a wonderful year with a lot of surprises and a lot of exciting new things and content for you guys. And I'll make a great effort. I'm already doing a great effort to provide high value to all the audience here at JNandez Poker. So look out for very interesting and hopefully successful implementation and changes on this channel, on Facebook, as well as on Twitter, but also on the website, JNandez.poker, which is building up at this very moment. And should be out in about a week or 2. So look out for that as well. On the left here, I get 3-bet, which is not an amazing situation, but we're certainly going to call. We're out of position, unfortunately, and we have a hand that tends to be dominated a very reasonable amount of the time. But folding is just very expensive. We're going to lose 3.5 big blinds. And again, in the grand scheme of things, 350 big blinds, 100 is a very big losing rate, and only very rarely outperformed by folding. So calling is very rarely outperformed by folding, is what I'm saying. Same principle on the right table. On the right table with actually thought I have 9-8. With 9-8, I would have just let out and trying to take it down because my hand plays very bad on future cards, and even against like 2 check back ranges, I tend to lose the hand somehow when I give a free card. On the left, I call. This is not an excellent hand, but the thing is, when you're on the button in total position, in guaranteed position, it's pretty difficult to actually make a loss on the call, on the investment. And that comes obviously with playing reasonably and reasonably well post flop, but at the same time, it is not that difficult to play reasonably post flop if you are in total position, in control of the action. A lot of the times you can decide whether to take free cards or make a bet, manipulate the sizings and stuff like that, and float on dry boards and dynamic boards with various types of draws, and that just gives you a lot of flexibility and ends up being also a lot of EV basically that the positional advantage is going to add. This is a weak hand, but the open is very small, and it's not such a weak hand on the right that I decide to call. The big blind folds. If you face a min raise, you should probably not fold many hands there at a very low frequency. It goes check check, and the 10 could mean that he's not going to connect so often with a hand because the queen jack type of hands and 10-9s and jack 10s are going to bet the flop. So I see opportunity to bluff there, but at the same time, sometimes he's going to connect and I still have a draw, which I would like to realize. So I think both options are okay. On the left, I 3-bet. You can also just flat, but I tend to 3-bet the bad aces as well. They're not going to play very well in single raise pots. And there is the possibility that someone comes over the top pre-flop, not believing the spot. So this guy pots now on the turn. The 10-9 is out there and 5-9, which is going to beat me. Pretty concerning that he goes for the sizing, but there are certainly hands I beat, Jack or Jack 8, Jack 8-9 and stuff. So I'm going to actually make a call. I'm not quite sure what to do on the river. The problem is that I don't think he's bluffing really. On the right, I got a straight with the blockers. He goes for pot, so he needs to be holding the worst hand here, 1 in 3 times. So I think he's polarizing now to a point where he says he has 10-9 or maybe the blockers. And I don't think that he's going to show up with the blockers 1 in 3 times. So I'm going to make this fold, which seems weird, calling the turn and folding the river. But I see a lot of players just betting also 2 pair and sets on this turn card for that sizing. On the right table, I call a turn lead out. I'm a little bit concerned with him actually holding the nuts, but with 2 9s in my hand against an unknown player, I have great difficulties folding really. So with this pricing, which is a different price than 2-1 here on the river, I'm going to end up calling 2 9s in a straight. I think it's just a little bit too much to be folding here against an unknown player who we just don't know if he plays very reasonably or not. So I think I'm forced to make a call here, and he ends up having the nuts, which is not too surprising. We're getting a good price there. But with the blockers, I think we are obligated, quote unquote, to make this call. And unfortunately shows us the nuts with some blockers as well. We need to reload here on the left table. This is actually a hand on the left that I'm deciding to fold. The very worst hands, I think you should fold in the big blind, but a lot of players are folding also pretty decent ones, and that is a big mistake because the big blind is very costly to give up on and influences your overall win rate quite a bit. Also quite a bit more than people sometimes think. The ace high suit on the left, I'm calling, multi-way pot. The hand doesn't play extremely well multi-way. The reason is because my hand is not so good connected. But still, nutty suit and the ace king queen is still going to lead towards some nut straights and not full houses. And I think the 15 3 big blinds before the flop is definitely affordable to call. The queen queen 5-7 is one of the tricky hands, again, because I have a pair in my hand, and if I would get 3-bet, I'm a little bit in a trouble situation. But we have to short stack at the table, and if they're actually 3-betting, it's a little bit of a different story a lot of the times, where we can still just go all in or something. Here though, this guy, we have 250 hands on him, 3-bet 2% so far, so very, very tight, and I'm actually going to fold. I think there's a decent chance this guy goes all in, and we can have a look on what he's actually 3-betting to get a little bit more information on him in case he 3-bets something silly. This time we didn't. And this like fold and watch option is pretty practical on PokerStars. Just gonna update this auto rebuy function so I don't have to click all the time. Although, is there some higher stakes action going? Doesn't look too interesting, to be honest. So I'm going to auto rebuy here. Okay. King 10-9-9, good enough to ISO against a limp. He calls. This is a pretty bad board for me, for my range, for my hand. I'm going to check back. Call this turn. And fold this river. And I keep an eye on the higher stakes action in case there is something going, but at the moment that's not the case. We got 64 entries in the pool, a lot of unknown players, so this should lead towards interesting action, but we'll see what comes up. I think I'm actually going to fold my queen F flush draw. It's not a very good flush draw, and there are two players, so the possibility of someone holding better flush is quite high. I also have 3 spades, so the chance of making the flush is also not as high. But mainly I'm concerned there about domination, that someone has me dominated or someone's holding a blocker, and then when the spade rolls off is going to bluff me out of the pot. I open the perfect connector, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm going to check fold this board because the middle position cold caller is going to have a lot of kings in his range, a few aces, not very many, and also very much a lot of high cards like king, queen, jack, 9, and the jack, jack 3 board is just not very good for my range. On the right table, I decide to 3-bet my double suited kings. It's a very strong holding, a lot of equity, and ahead of any opening range, really. I get a cold caller. Those cold callers are going to have a lot of very connected hands, so they're going to correlate with this board, queen, jack, 10 and stuff, but with the 184 in the middle, and me holding the nut gut shot and overpair and backdoor flush draw, the money goes in here. The only question is what sizing, and on the left, I 4-bet my ace, queen, queen, jack, blind on blind, which is quite standard. So I'm betting 138, and on the left I'm gonna pot it and get the money in with the overpair, the gutter, and the backdoor flush draw. On the right, I'm actually pick it up, which is pretty surprising. And on the left, unfortunately, quote unquote, we have to get it in. I prefer to just win the 267 like that, but it looks like we have to compete here. So let's see. We have 67% of equity, and he turns the nuts. So that didn't work out quite well, but we got it in with a lot of equity, and that's what matters and is going to work out in the long run, basically. On the right, open middle position, and 4-5-7 is a bad board for my range. I'm also not going to bet here, and like even him leading out is a pretty often seen strategy from the big blind, because the low cards are just not going to correlate very well with my middle position opening range that involves a lot of high cards and high pairs rather than the low cards. Defend on the right against the min raise, top pair, and a few backdoors. I think here I most likely want to call, but he goes ahead and pots. And so far he's been c-betting 100%. I don't see the sample, unfortunately. I'm not sure what to think. I just don't. I think I'm going to make an 80 fold. I mean, it's really difficult for me to be ahead in any significant form in terms of equity with one pair and very poor backdoors. So I decided to make the fold. On the left, we face a flop call, and I'm going to fire the turn here. Almost always going to have the best hand by this turn. And if he goes in for 160, we will have to call. Not even very unhappily. On the right, we call. We could also squeeze this hand, but we don't have ace-king, and also we do not want to squeeze necessarily against an under-the-gun opener. But now we do get squeezed, and this is a not so nice situation, but also our suits are going to dominate other suits sometimes, so it's not an absurdly bad situation. This guy who squeezed is though going to have aces quite often, which blocks our capability to flop good, but also, you know, dominates us in some way. So we're not too excited until we see this flop. And on this flop, I'm actually going to induce, because flong here in the big blind is going to jam a lot of the times his aces, and I would definitely like someone to come along with a weaker flush draw. That would add in a lot of EV, I think, to my situation. On the left, though, the same player bets 30. I don't really believe he's going to bet fold quite often, so I decided to just call. On the right, wow. I'm a little bit intimidating, but with all the money in the middle already and me holding some outs that are almost likely to the nuts, I think I'm actually going to call this. It feels a little bit silly, though, to be quite honest. Feels a little bit silly, but there's a lot of money out there to be fighting for. 40%, which is, you know, enough to get the money in for certain. Unfortunately, drawing dead on this turn card, and you can see he had the clubs as well as a straight flush blocker, a straight flush draw, and a straight draw, full house draw as well, which got another turn, and I end up losing, but as you can see, I had a lot of equity there. On the left, we're just jamming the not flush. I think Ashley is going to have a flush as well. Quite often, no, so that was probably a set. And we're heading off to a problematic start here, but at the end of the day, EV is what matters. And in all the situations that we saw so far, I think I took the right option. And that's what we want to focus on, specifically on a day where a lot of blue players are out there. We got two pair on the right. On the left, we don't have anything. So we're in give up mode. And on the right, I think I want to protect my hand a little bit here. King deuce is very vulnerable against ace X. Flush draw is out there as well. But he ends up folding. Most likely a hand that was drawing that. On the left, we have an interesting flop, the 5-4-4, and I'm actually going to lead out. It's pretty difficult for someone to have a 4 in this board, given pre-flop ranges, and the big blind can easily have a 4, and we still have a 5 as an out, most likely, and 6-7 for an open-ended straight draw. If you're playing against 3 other players, it's going to look pretty intimidating. When someone leads out against all those players on this flop, unfortunately, we get raised to 185. So very much convinced this guy has me beat. But I still think it's worth betting the flop here. And I think it will get a lot of respect, basically, when you're playing against multiple people. That's one thing you can use to your advantage. When there are more players, multiple players in the pot, then your bets will get more credit. And players will find themselves handcuffed because there are other players behind still left to act. On the left, I bet it's basically like a block or a bluff. Trying to get people to fold, but they're not cooperating. And I think I'm not going to fire on the deuce. Could fire and represent a hand like 2 kings, but are they going to believe me? I mean, nobody raised, so I'm a little bit confused. I'm going to fire. I feel like if someone has queen jack, still going to call, and I'm still ahead against this hand. And yeah, this guy had queen jack. But this way I don't cap my range, and I think it looks very strong. So I like the double barrel. Unfortunately, the river was not so pleasant, and I'm pretty convinced he has queen jack there and made it not straight. And I don't call it off with 1 pair, obviously. That would be pretty optimistic. Ace queen queen 10 is a hand that is very strong. I'm going to 3-bet it, actually. This guy opens only 17%, but the hand is a hammer, and it blocks aces with the ace in my hand. He instantly 4-bets, and this is a very unfortunate situation, but it is also a very clear fold because our hand is just performing so badly against 2 aces that we actually just have to fold before the flop. And that's one of the disadvantages of 3-betting this hand, but it is not going to happen very often, specifically when we hold the ace ourselves. And a lot of the times it's going to call, and we are in a wonderful position with the ace queen queen. Some connected hand here on the left. See what we can do. So against the late position open, you can certainly 3-bet this hand. I don't really see the necessity to do so in a situation against middle position. This guy has a very strong range, or a lot of players have very strong ranges in that position, and my hand clearly doesn't have an equity edge. He doesn't even have a playability edge necessarily, so just calling is fine. We turn the nuts, we river the nuts, so we're going to bet through. And on the right table with the blockers, I'm also going to bet through. If we improve, it changes, but if we do not improve, I'm firing through. He calls very quickly on the turn card, and the river is the ace, and I'm going to go for 147. And sometimes we're going to have like Jack Jack 10 and call us off, or Jack Jack 9, or Jack 8 9, but I think it's worth going for 3, and he ends up folding. The left, not quite sure what to think about this, but can't be too bad. It doesn't have to work very often. Talked about that before. Good raise and fold. And the ace king king is again one of those hands that is very strong in terms of preflop equity and does a great job 3-betting and makes a lot of money this way. So we 3-bet against this player, raindrops, and he actually folds, which is a very good result as well, which is going to pick up the pot without having to contest against other people's equity. On the left, I'm going to go a little bit tricky mode. My hand is going to play very difficult if I bet and get called, and that's why I actually decide to check and trying to induce the button to do something so I can go all in. And now it gets a little bit out of line, but I'm still convinced that the money has to go in here from my end. Someone could have a set, obviously, but a lot of the times, as you can see on the board texture, they're going to have draws and the button stabber is going to actually fold. Queen 6. If I had Queen 5, I would probably think twice about it, but with the Ace King, the money would maybe still go in there. Money goes in, and he has a straight and a flush draw, unfortunately. For me, he gets there. On the right, we could think about squeezing, but I don't have any info on the opener, and he could be very tight from that position, and that's why I just called. But against the button or so, you obviously 3-betting here all day long. And on the left, I mean, unfortunately, like a lot of his draws are going to have more equity than me. But that said, I still think I need to get in the money there. We pick up aces, so that could help us building some momentum. Hopefully. We get a walk here, yeah. Yeah, some days some days everything flows and some days everything goes, right? We'll see. It's just a few hands so far. Not set in stone how this is going to end up. 10-10-4-4 is one of those hands that's, I think it's actually not a bad hand. It plays very well, even out of position. You're either flopping it or not. In this signal raise scenario, it plays well, but there are situations where it doesn't do so well. When we get 3-bet, for example, this guy leads for 30. And this is actually a pretty funny spot because I could call and then use my blockers and wait for a blank in order to improve against the hand, like against his overall range. So I'm a little bit confused. I'm gonna give it a try. This is the reason I called, to turn a blank and then get the money in, or turn straightening card and then play the blockers. But sometimes he's going to have jacks here, and that's how the game goes. But also Jack 9 is out there, Jack X of clubs, wraps, and my set goes in the middle. And we're hoping to be good. On the left, delay C-bet. He actually has jacks and a flush draw, so quite difficult to win there. On the left with the open-ended straight draw, and is that, no, we have actually a wrap. But I didn't bet the flop, so I don't think I get a lot of credit for mate hands on the turn. So I'm gonna just call and draw. And on the right, we obviously got it in very bad, but it seems unavoidable. Now flopping 2 pair. Gonna go for a lead out in the name of protection. Make it 42. I think that's necessary on this board texture. We do get a call from Monster 555. And the king, is the king going to convince us to not get all the money in here? I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the stack size, we need to protect our hand, and if he wants to go for it, I think we have to gamble it up. He has 62 bucks left. It's gross. I mean, there are a lot of hands that beat us, but 62 for 466. I think it's just too good of a price to take, and we're going to lose here a very high amount of the time, in my opinion, but not enough to fold against $62 jam. So shows us the nuts. And on the left, we got a very strong hand to 3-bet, and this is an amazing flop. And a flop, or I'm actually going to bet. Actually using a little bit of a smaller sizing here. Hope he comes along and does something. He calls, which is also fine. And now question is whether to fire one more or not. And I'm actually going to go for another small bet. Yeah, I mean, my hand is really strong. If he has a better flush draw, so be it. But I want to maximize here against some hands. He has 2 pair probably, but I have a huge draw. And for once, I get there. One time. So far, the session, like how is the session going so far? To give a little bit of an update, Twitch style. So far I'm losing like 2.3. So about 4 buy-ins, which is pretty normal swing. We see how you can continue to make good decisions here. Very strong flop on the right nut wrap and the second nut flush draw. Very decent situation. He check raises. We don't block the board, so we don't block the pairs on the board. So very feasible he has king king or king jack. So I don't think there's much reason to do anything else than calling. If I go all in, he's not going to fold this board texture after raising. Not very often, so let's see what the turn brings. We're not going to fold the turn card unless it would be a king or a jack. And the 6 would be kind of close, but probably a fold as well. The 7 of spades, though, is not a fold. We obviously were looking for another card, but just have too big of a draw to be folding here. And we hope he doesn't have ace 10 of diamonds or ace 10 with ace high flush draw. That river is not very helpful though. Double suited ace king, semi-connected. It's fine enough to be opening most of the time in middle position. And by most of the time, I mean on most table conditions. This guy open raises though, which is it's very weird. Has a very weird range. It seems like he opens 45% under the gun, which is probably not true, but he most likely is some way out of line and maybe not the strongest player. So I'm going to go for a 3-bet and trying to play 101 against this guy, but we get called by raindrops and top pair and a flush draw potentially is enough for me to bet here. Obviously to get the money in, if my flush draw would be bigger, like the ace high flush draw, I would probably size a little bit down. But the way it is, betting and getting ready to call a shove. So this has been somewhat of a rougher session, but whoever is used to the Twitch stream, JNandez Poker, knows there are a lot of up and downs in this business. That's okay. As long as we focus on making the best decisions, thinking strategically and not so emotionally, or letting our emotions block and cloud our strategical thinking, our logical thinking. And by just talking through situations and decisions, just bringing in the logic this way, talking it out like I do here on cam, but also sometimes, a lot of the times when I'm not recording, helps a ton to just rationalize your thoughts and avoid your mindset of getting cloudy and thinking or not thinking at all and getting emotionally, basically. But I hope this video helped you to get an insight into a few of my strategies and the way I play and pursue the game. In the very near future, there's going to be a lot of content and a lot of streams on JNandez Poker. And that's going to happen in January, so you don't have to wait that long, but we're working hard on it and deliberate. And hopefully you have a little bit more patience. And for all the loyal viewers, I produced this video. I'm going to produce a few other ones so you have something to get value from, basically. So thank you very much for tuning in. I'm going to play this hand on the left here against this player, Windhover. very strong holding, but also we're deep and this guy could be out of line a little bit. So I'm excited to get into the pot, maybe make something happen. The flop though, it's not too promising. 9 gives us the nut straight. We have some backdoor opportunities. I'm actually going to check because this board, I'm pretty attackable with my 3-betting range. I don't have 6-7 very often, and I have all those hands to improve, all those cards to improve. The king, the queen, the 10, the 9, maybe even the 8, the spades, and the clubs. So I definitely want to see turns and rivers. On this turn though, you know, I cannot do too much, I think, and I'm going to actually fold. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. JNandez 87. Going to be back pretty soon on Twitch Poker. Talk to you soon, guys.